of the smartest kids in the world and how they got that way. You can listen to this recording or you can read it on your own. The PDF is posted in Schoology as well. So here we go. Prologue, the mystery. For most of my career at Time and other magazines, I worked hard to avoid education stories. If my editors asked me to write about schools or tests, I countered with an idea about terrorism, plane crashes, or pandemic flu. That usually worked. I didn't say so out loud, but education stories seemed, well, kind of soft. The articles tended to be headlined in chalkboard font and festooned with pencil doodles. They were brimming with good intentions, but not much evidence. The people quoted were mostly adults. The kids just turned up in the photos, smiling and silent. Then an editor asked me to write about a controversial new leader of Washington, D.C.'s public schools. I didn't know much about Michelle Rhee, except that she wore stiletto to heels and tended to say crap a lot in interviews. So I figured it would be a good story, even if it meant slipping into the fog of education. But something unexpected happened in the fog. I spent months talking to education in new ways. Pretty soon I realized that Rhee was interesting, but she was not the biggest mystery in the room. The real mystery was this: why were some kids learning so much and others so very little? Education was suddenly awash in data. We knew more than ever about what was happening or failing to happen from one neighborhood or classroom to the next, and it didn't add up. Everywhere I went, I saw nonsensical ups and downs in what kids knew, in rich neighborhoods and poor, white neighborhoods and black, public schools and private. The national data revealed the same peaks and valleys, like a sprawling, nauseating roller coaster. The dips and turns could be explained in part by the usual narratives of money, race, or ethnicity, but not entirely. Something else was going on too. Over the next few years, as I wrote more stories about education, I kept stumbling over this mystery. At Kimball Elementary School in Washington, D.C., I saw fifth graders literally begging their teacher to let them solve a long division problem on the chalkboard. If they got the answer right, they would pump their fists and whisper shout, "Yes!" This was a neighborhood where someone got murdered just about every week, a place with 18% unemployment. In other places, I saw kids bored out of their young minds, kids who looked up when a stranger like me walked into the room, watching to see if I would, please God, create some sort of distraction to save them for another hour of nothingness. So which of those two situations have you seen in your classrooms? Have you seen the kids get excited, or have you been a student who's been excited about solving something or figuring something out or having that aha moment? Or do you think you normally see kids who are just looking for a distraction? The student who's trying to get the teacher off task, off topic, tell a story about anything else, just don't teach us anything today. Which one of those two scenarios do you feel like you see most in our school? And which one of those scenarios do you feel yourself fitting into best? For a while, I told myself that this was the variation you'd expect from one neighborhood to the next, from one principal or teacher to another. Some kids got lucky, I supposed, but most of the differences that mattered had to do with money and privilege. Then one day I saw this chart, and it blew my mind. The United States might have remained basically flat over time, but that was the exception, it turned out. Look at Finland. It had rocketed from the bottom of the world to the top without pausing for breath. And what was going on with Norway right next door, which seemed to be slip-sliding into the abyss despite having virtually no child poverty? And there was Canada, careening up from mediocrity to the heights of Japan. If education was a function of culture, could culture change that dramatically? That fast? So here's the chart that she's talking about right here. So it's a little bit difficult to see things, but here's the United States' line right here. So going up a little bit, but really not that much of a change. Japan, she mentions, is up here. Here's Finland, though. Look, or this is Korea, sorry. Korea kind of has this rainbow arc. And then Finland starts way down here in the 510 test score zone and goes all the way up here towards the top. That's pretty crazy. Canada's kind of taken a similar path from down here all the way up to here. Worldwide, children's skills rose and fell in mysterious and hopeful ways, sometimes over short periods of time. The mystery I'd noticed in Washington, D.C. got far more interesting when viewed from outer space. The vast majority of countries did not manage to educate all their kids to high levels, not even their better off kids. Compared to most countries, the United States was typical. Not much better, not much worse. But in a small number of countries, really just a handful of eclectic nations, something incredible was happening. Virtually all kids were learning critical thinking skills in math, science, and reading. They weren't just memorizing facts, they were learning to solve problems and adapt. That is to say, they were training to survive in the modern economy. How to explain it? American kids were better off on average than the typical child in Japan, New Zealand, or South Korea, yet they knew far less math than those children. Our most privileged teenagers had highly educated parents and attended the richest schools in the world, yet they scored below privileged kids in 27 other nations in math, well below affluent kids in New Zealand, Belgium, France, and Korea, among other places. The typical child in Beverly Hills performed below average compared to all kids in Canada. Not some other distant land, Canada. A great education by the standards of suburban American looked, from afar, exceedingly average. Write down, if you don't know what it means, affluent. There's a couple other words before we came to here, too, that you could write down as vocab words. Exceedingly might be another one. At first, I told myself to resist the hype. Did it really matter if we ranked number 1 in the world in educational outcomes? Or even number 10? Our elementary students did just fine on international tests, thank you very much, especially in reading. The problems arose in math and science, and they became more obvious when our kids grew into teenagers. That's when American students scored 26th on a test of critical thinking and math, below average for the developed world. But so what? Our teenagers had performed at or below average on international tests for as long as anyone had been counting. It hadn't mattered much to our economy so far. Why should it matter in the future? The United States was a big, diverse country. We had other advantages that overwhelmed our K-12 mediocrity, right? We still had world-class research universities, and we continued to invest more in research and development than any other nation. It was easier to start a business here than in most places on Earth. The values of hard work and self-sufficiency coursed like electricity through the United States, just as they always had. But everywhere I went as a reporter, I saw reminders that the world had changed. The 2,300 days that our kids spent in school before high school graduation mattered more than ever. Have you ever thought about it that way? 2,300 days that you've spent in school. In Oklahoma, the CEO of the company that makes McDonald's apple pies told me she had trouble finding enough Americans to handle modern factory jobs during a recession. The days of rolling out dough and packing pies into boxes were over. She needed people who could read, solve problems, and communicate what had happened on their shift, and there weren't enough of them coming out of Oklahoma's high schools and community colleges. The head of Manpower, a staffing and recruiting firm with offices in 82 countries, said one of the hardest jobs to fill anywhere was the sales job. Once upon a time, a salesperson had to have thick skin and a good golf game. Over the years, however, products and financial markets had become wildly more complex, and information had become available to everyone, including the customer. Relationships were no longer everything. To succeed, salespeople had to understand the increasingly sophisticated and customizable products they were selling almost as well as the engineers who worked on them. Rather suddenly, academic mediocrity had become a heavier legacy to bear. Without a high school diploma, you couldn't work as a garbage collector in New York City. You couldn't join the Air Force. Yet a quarter of our kids still walked out of high school and never came back. Not long ago, 0 countries had a better high school graduation rate than the United States. By 2011, about 20 countries did. In an era in which knowledge mattered more than ever, why did our kids know less than they should? How much of our problems could be blamed on diversity, poverty, or vastness of country? Were our weaknesses mostly failures of policy or culture, of politicians, or of parents? We told ourselves that we were at least raising more creative children, the kind who might not excel in electrical engineering, but who had the audacity to speak up, to invent, and to redefine what was possible. But was there a way to know if we were right? Audacity, another good vocab word. Write it down. The mythical Nordic robots. Education pundits had worked mightily to explain different countries' wildly different results. They had visited faraway schools on choreographed junkets. They debriefed politicians and principals and generated PowerPoints for the folks back home. However, their conclusions were maddeningly abstract. Take Finland, for example, which ranked at the top of the world. American educators described Finland as a silky paradise, a place where all the teachers were admired and all the children beloved. They insisted that Finland had attained this bliss partly because it had very low rates of child poverty, while the United States had high rates. According to this line of reasoning, we could never fix our schools until we fixed poverty. The poverty narrative made intuitive sense. Intuitive, what's that mean? The child poverty rate in the United States was about 20%, a national disgrace. Poor kids lived with the kind of grinding stress that children should not have to manage. They learned less at home on average and needed more help at school. The mystery was not so simply solved, however. If poverty was the main problem, then what to make of Norway? A Nordic welfare state with high taxes, universal health care, and abundant natural resources, Norway enjoyed, like Finland, less than 6% child poverty, one of the lowest rates in the world. Norway spent about as much as we did on education, which is to say a fortune, relative to the rest of the world. And yet Norwegian kids performed just as unimpressively as our own kids at an international test of scientific literacy in 2009. Something was amiss in Norway, and it wasn't poverty. Meanwhile, the Finns themselves offered vague explanations for their success. Education, I was told, had always been valued in Finland, going back hundreds of years. That explained it. But then why did only 10% of children finish high school in Finland in the 1950s? Why were there huge gaps between what rural and urban kids knew and could do in Finland in the 1960s? Back then, Finland's passion for education had seemed rather uneven. What had happened? At the same time, President Barack Obama and his education secretary said they envied the South Korean education system, lauding its highly respected teachers and its demanding parents. On the surface, at least, Korea appeared to have nothing in common with Finland. The Korean system was driven by testing, and Korean teenagers spent more time studying than our kids spent awake. Listening to this cacophony, I kept wondering what it would be like to actually be a kid in these mystical lands of high scores, zero dropouts, and college graduates. Were Finnish kids really the Nordic robots that I kept reading about? Did Korean kids think they were getting such a sweet deal? What about their parents? No one talked about them. Didn't parents matter even more than teachers? I decided to spend a year traveling around the world on a field trip to the smart kid countries. I wanted to go see these little bots for myself. What were they doing at 10 on a Tuesday morning? What did their parents say to them when they got home? Were they happy? Field agents. To meet the Nordic robots, I needed some sources on the inside, kids who could see and do things that I could never do on my own, so I recruited a team of young experts to help. During the 2010-2011 school year, I followed 3 remarkable American teenagers as they experienced smarter countries in real life. These kids volunteered to be a part of this project as they headed off for the year-long foreign exchange adventures, far from their families. I visited them in their foreign posts, and we kept in close touch. Their names were Kim, Eric, and Tom, and they served as my escorts through borrowed homes and adopted cafeterias, volunteer fixers in a foreign land. Kim traveled from Oklahoma to Finland, Eric from Minnesota to South Korea, and Tom from Pennsylvania to Poland. They came from different parts of America and they left for different reasons. I met Kim, Eric, and Tom with the help of AFS, Youth for Understanding, and the Rotary Clubs, outfits that run exchange programs around the world. I chose these Americans as advisors, but they turned out to be straight-up protagonists. They did not stand at all for all American kids, and their experience could not reflect the millions of realities in their host countries. But in their stories, I found the life that was missing from the policy briefings. Kim, Eric, and Tom kept me honest. They didn't want to talk about tenure policies or tiger moms, unburdened by the hang-ups of adults. They talked a lot about other kids, the most powerful influences in teenagers' lives. All day long, they contemplated the full arc of their new lives, from their host families' kitchens to their high school bathrooms. They had much to say. In each country, my American field agents introduced me to other kids, parents, and teachers who became co-conspirators in this quest. In Korea, for example, Eric sent me to his friend Jenny, a teenager who had spent half her childhood in America and the other half in Korea. Jenny, an accidental expert on education, patiently answered questions that Eric could not. To put the conclusions of these informants in context, I surveyed hundreds of other exchange students about their experiences in the United States and abroad.